Okay. Here goes. I've always had an overactive imagination. I'm an artist and I was diagnosed with ADHD as a child. Never medicated though. So, my mind was constantly everywhere. And I was always drawing and fucking around as a kid. My imagination would do terrible things to me sometimes, probably a result of watching horror movies at a young age. Scary shit lurked around every corner. But on one occasion I knew it was not just my imagination. I was in 6th grade at the time. Probably 12 or so. And I lived in a small town of a major highway. Like seriously small. The only major thing in the town burned to hell 20 years ago. Then a kid died in the high school, so it was condemned. The only shit here was a cemetery, lake, post office, gas station, all on about 4 blocks of town. Another strange thing about this town is the fact that in the early 1900s it was booming. Now it was a dusty literal ghost town with about 40 people living there. People who never spoke or went outside. The only other kids were my best friends. And there were only 3 of us, and every morning we walked together to the bus stop. And none of us spoke on most mornings. One morning it was more foggy than usual. But I remember it was cold and a little misty outside. My uncle, now deceased, grew up here and he always told me fucked up stories about this town. He told me to watch myself, strange shit was going on here. But he was kind of a loony. So, I didn't worry about most times. This morning though. This morning felt off. I was not too stressed because I knew the others would be walking up soon enough. And when they did not, I started freaking out. And when I stood alone at the bus stop my imagination started going wild. I was in the middle of imagining a set of eyes in the mist when from about 10 feet away from me to the left I remember seeing something walking. This was real. I remember every detail. It was a man. In shape and stature. But the way it walked seriously makes my bones numb. Slow and rhythmic. Like it was floating. My 12-year-old eyes bulged out of my skull and I remember freezing in terror. Good God. I can't even stop shaking while typing this. Then he looked at me. Fucking looked directly at me. Eyes. His eyes. They were so far apart they were almost on the sides of his head which was oblong. Like, I don't know. A sideways egg but not that long. And he had a small nose in the center. Absolutely hairless. No hair. Just pale dirty white skin. With crooked jagged yellow teeth underneath a disgusting smile. I've seen a ton of creepypasta threads and heard almost exact descriptions of ghouls and I've wondered if maybe they saw who or what I saw but it's never the same. He did not leave me until the headlights of the school bus came over the hill. Then without taking his eyes off me he raised one hand and waved. But not like goodbye wave. More like a see you around wave. Then walked slowly away from the spot he stood for what felt like an eternity. When the bus pulled up I was crying. I don't know why. I don't remember what triggered it. But the driver had to call the school who called my mom who came and picked me up. I tried telling her what I saw. But she did not believe me. She said that it was probably just a guy in a mask fucking with me. I knew it wasn't. I know it wasn't because for the next 5 years of my life he was there. Watching me. And almost enjoying our time together. Like he was watching his favorite TV show. For the first few months his appearance sent me into a terrible frenzy of crying and screaming. And my mom who was single most of my childhood worked 2nd and 3rd shifts to keep our house, was never there at night or afternoon to watch me. So I never had anyone to tell. I was frightened and alone so much, but whenever I would see him I would call my grandma and talk to her on the phone hoping he would see this and think I was talking to the cops or something. I do not know I was 12 to 13. I would shit the blinds and watch TV and try not to think about it. He only would make appearances like once a week. So it wasn't an everyday kind of thing. Then at some point I remember that I realized he never came near me or touched me or anything. He just stood watching me. Whether it be outside my widow's or in the cornfield just beyond the fence to the playground at school. I remember I got used to him. And after a while he was nothing more than scenery. And when I would go on trips or vacation or something he wasn't there. It was only around this small town. On one instance when I was about 15 or 16 I was on a walk with a friend of mine. We were walking near the edge of the town where the paved roads turn into gravel and the cemetery sits next to the graveyard. When I saw Skinwalker as I had taken to calling him. He was about 100 yards away. Leaning casually up against a gravestone. I asked my friend while keeping my eye on Skinwalker wanna go into the graveyard. He was down, so we went in. It had become obvious to me that Skinwalker wasn't noticed by anyone other than myself. So it wasn't a shock that when I walked almost directly next to him my buddy was oblivious. Shit. I remember that was the closest I'd ever been to him. He was so much more detailed this close. His skin. Christ. I'll never forget it. It was almost translucent. He wasn't just pale. He was old. And he was staring directly into my eyes. His eyes. They were green. Not black. I remember. Green with a hint of yellow and brown. I remember he had pretty eyes. But they were so beady and far apart. I had forgotten all about my friend when he said, "Why are you staring at that gravestone?" I looked at him and then Skinwalker. But he wasn't there anymore. Just an old weathered slab of tall concrete. I looked at it for a second. Then I noticed a name. Blank blank 1846-1874. I paid no attention to this for a long time. Until I noticed that every time I was in the graveyard, there he was. Same pose. Same stone. Watching me. One day, I was reading a book on the paranormal when I thought about something. Maybe he was just a ghost. And maybe he wanted me to help him. So I came up with a plan. Yeah. I forgot to address this. When I first started seeing him, my first thoughts were to hide. But then when I got used to him, I didn't want to take pictures. I was too frightened to imagine the outcome of photographing him. And yet, I didn't have a phone until I was 16. And even then it wasn't a camera phone. My mom had a camera, but it was pretty much off limits to me. We weren't well off on money. So things like that were kept out of my reach. I rode my bike to the graveyard. I don't know why I rode a bike. At the time I thought it might make a quicker getaway if he tried to get me or something. I don't know. Anyway, I approached him. Standing there as usual, and I said, "Can you hear me?" He just looked. Blank-faced. No. No response. "If you need my help, tell me." Then he seemed to get angry. I don't remember exactly what happened. All I remember was that I ran. I ran and didn't look back until I was on my bike. And then when I got onto my bike, I turned. He was standing there. Still at the gravestone with one arm stretches out to me. Like he was reaching for me. To come back. Or like he was sorry or something. I don't know. I didn't stick around for much longer to find out. I rode as fast as I could home. And that was the last time I saw him for a while. A few months went by and I started to get really anxious. Avoiding being alone, avoiding going outside after dark. I was so scared I would see him again. But at the same time I felt bad. Like I shouldn't have upset him. I felt sorry for him. I don't know. It's weird, but I felt like we were friends. I still feel like we were friends. The first time I saw him again was while I was riding the bus to school. I no longer had to walk to the bus stop though. I was in high school. But I know it was him. He was walking. Or dancing down the sidewalk, but it was only a quick glance. He watched me go past him. I knew he knew I was on. And that was it. His appearance became less and less frequent until one night. The last night I've ever seen him. I was 17 years old and my mom had announced we were moving. Things had gotten serious with her boyfriend and we were moving in with him. Our boxes were being packed, and the house was on the market. It was about midnight and I was alone in the house as usual. I was drawing in my living room. I had my supplies laid out in front of me and I was going to town on the paper when I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. It was him. But this was a first. He was in my house. My first reaction was to scream. He took a step back. I remember this as being a strange moment. I was quiet. And he seemed scared. We watched each other for a moment, then I realized I had nothing to fear and I went back to drawing. He moved about for a moment and wound up standing behind me. It was like he wanted to watch me draw. So I remember letting him. He moved himself in front of me. He stood there looking not at me, my sketches, but at me. I'm not sure how long this lasted. But at some point I realized he must have wanted me to draw him. So I did. I started slowly. But eventually it was normal. I just sat completely silent drawing this being. This fucked up thing that had followed me for damn near 5 years. And when I was done, I held my notebook up. He seemed to be happy. He seemed to be completely ecstatic. His smile seemed bigger and his eyes seemed more kind. I'm pretty sure I smiled too. He liked it. I have absolutely no idea how long we stayed that way. But eventually he turned away from me and walked into another room. And then, he was gone. Forever. My mom and I moved and went on with our lives. I'm 20 now and living on my own. And I wish with everything inside of me I didn't leave that notebook with my mother, because it's probably in storage somewhere now. I wish I could show you guys that drawing. But it's not here at my apartment. So, I did this for you all. Here he is. His image forever burned into my skull. I would also like to say this. Every year, since I've moved, I go back to that gravestone and I leave flowers. Every year I've hoped to see him standing there. And I plan on doing this until I die. /X/, that's my story. Few people know it. And even fewer believe me.